He was the youngest MVP in NBA history, a hometown hero who lifted an entire city with every explosive drive. But behind the cheers and highlight reels lay a story the headlines twisted, a trial that divided the nation, and a fall no one, not even Derrick Rose himself, ever saw coming. Bancho Mon Toi Viet Tiep Pan Tu, Channel Intro Kong. Welcome to Off-Court Truths, where we uncover the stories the league won't revisit, the moments fame cannot protect, and the untold realities behind basketball's most unforgettable figures. Derrick Rose was more than a basketball star. He was a symbol of hope. Born and raised in Chicago's South Side, he carried the weight of a community that saw him not just as a talented young athlete, but as proof that greatness could emerge from even the harshest environments. With a rare blend of humility and electrifying athleticism, Rose entered the NBA in 2008 as the city's chosen son, the player destined to resurrect the Chicago Bulls. His rise was meteoric. Within 3 seasons, he became the youngest MVP in league history, a title that seemed to confirm his destiny. Every explosive drive, every acrobatic finish, every fearless moment on the court felt like a promise. Chicago is back. But while the world celebrated his ascent, the pressure on Rose grew heavier. Expectations intensified. Critics demanded more. Fans clung tightly to the idea of their hero, unaware of how fragile that dream truly was. Then came the injuries, brutal, relentless, and emotionally devastating. Each setback chipped away at Rose's confidence and reshaped public perception. The hero who once lifted a franchise now found himself fighting to reclaim even a fraction of what he once was. And just when he believed he could rebuild his career, another storm formed, one far more personal, public, and damaging than any injury he'd ever suffered. So what happened to Derrick Rose? What turned a beloved MVP into one of the most polarizing figures of his era? The breaking point in Derrick Rose's story arrived at the intersection of physical devastation and public scrutiny. After tearing his ACL in the 2012 playoffs, Rose began a long and emotionally grueling battle to reclaim his identity as a superstar. Each attempted comeback brought new injuries, meniscus tears, complications, and extended absences that eroded not just his explosiveness, but his confidence. Fans who once worshipped him grew impatient. Critics questioned his toughness. The city that once lifted him on its shoulders now demanded answers he couldn't give. But the real fracture came years later, when Rose became the subject of a highly publicized civil trial involving allegations that placed him directly under the harshest spotlight of his career. Though the proceedings were not criminal and Rose maintained his innocence throughout, the headlines were relentless, invasive, and sensational. Every detail became ammunition for public opinion, and every moment in court overshadowed the athlete he once was. The combination of physical decline, emotional exhaustion, and the media storm surrounding the trial created a breaking point that no MVP could withstand. Rose was no longer viewed solely as a fallen superstar. He became a polarizing figure whose future in the NBA suddenly felt uncertain, fragile, and painfully exposed. Derrick Rose's journey from hometown hero to national headline was never a straight line. It unfolded in emotional waves, moments of triumph, moments of devastation, and moments that forced the public to question everything they thought they knew about him. To understand the fall of the youngest MVP in NBA history, we must walk through the timeline that transformed admiration into heartbreak and heartbreak into controversy. His rise began in the South Side of Chicago, a place where opportunity was scarce and violence was common. Rose grew up fiercely protected by his mother and brothers, who shielded him from the dangers that swallowed so many others. Basketball became his escape, his identity, and eventually his ticket out. At Simeon Career Academy, he became a legend. At Memphis, he became a star. And in 2008, when the Chicago Bulls won the draft lottery, it felt like destiny. The city embraced him as one of their own, the kid who would bring winning back to the house that Michael Jordan built. From 2008 to 2011, Rose evolved at a pace few players had ever matched. His athleticism was otherworldly, violent yet graceful, controlled yet explosive. Fans watched in awe as he twisted through defenses, contorted his body midair, and landed on impossible angles. By his third season, he wasn't just good, he was transcendent. In 2011, he captured the MVP award at 22 years old, the youngest to ever do it. Chicago erupted. Rose wasn't merely a basketball star. He was a symbol of renewal for a city desperate for one. But everything changed on April 28, 2012. In Game 1 of the playoffs, with the Bulls up by double digits, Rose made a routine jump stop and collapsed. His ACL was torn, his season was over. And, as it would turn out, the trajectory of his career was altered forever. The months that followed were filled with hope, confusion, and controversy. Rose's rehab was slow and cautious. Some viewed this as responsible, others saw it as hesitation. When he didn't return during the 2013 playoffs despite medical clearance, fans grew restless. Analysts questioned his mentality. The same city that once adored him now scrutinized every decision. Rose insisted he needed to feel mentally ready, but the public wanted their hero back. They didn't understand the fear, the doubt, or the emotional weight that comes with rebuilding a body that once defied gravity. The next seasons were agonizing. Rose returned only to suffer another major injury, this time a torn meniscus. He returned again, and the meniscus tore once more. Every comeback brought hope. Every setback brought despair. The Bulls, once contenders, began to unravel. Chicago's dream dimmed, and Rose's confidence dimmed with it. By 2016, the franchise that once embraced him as its savior traded him to the New York Knicks. It was painful but inevitable. The city had moved on, and Rose had become a ghost of the phenom he once was. But his physical decline wasn't the only story unfolding. That same year, Rose became the subject of a civil trial that thrust him into a different kind of spotlight. The allegations were serious, intimate, and heavily publicized. While the case was civil, not criminal, and while Rose maintained his innocence throughout, the media frenzy surrounding the trial was overwhelming. Details from depositions circulated online, sparking debate, criticism, and intense polarization. Headlines framed Rose not as a fallen MVP, but as a controversial figure facing deeply personal accusations. The trial's emotional toll was evident. He appeared exhausted, distant, and burdened by forces far beyond basketball. When the jury ruled in his favor, the legal chapter closed, but the public's perception did not. For many, the headlines lingered longer than the verdict. The story became part of his narrative, shaping opinions in ways no stat line or highlight reel could undo. After the trial, Rose's NBA career entered a nomadic phase. He bounced from the Knicks to the Cavaliers to the Timberwolves, trying to rebuild himself both physically and emotionally. Each stop contained glimpses of the old Derrick, the sudden burst, the soft floater, the calm expression, but the sustained brilliance of his MVP days felt out of reach. Critics declared his career finished. Fans wondered if he should retire. Even Rose admitted he sometimes questioned if he belonged in the league anymore. Then came October 31st, 2018. In a game against the Utah Jazz, Rose, now a role player coming off the bench, delivered a performance that reignited the basketball world. He scored 50 points. 50. The arena erupted. Teammates hugged him. Fans cried. Rose himself broke down in tears, overwhelmed by emotion. For a moment, time reversed. The trial, the injuries, the heartbreak, all of it faded as the world witnessed a man reclaiming a part of himself he thought he had lost forever. But the timeline didn't end with a fairy tale. Rose's resurgence didn't erase the past. His legacy remained complicated, shaped by triumphs and controversies, by love and skepticism, by resilience and vulnerability. What the timeline of Derrick Rose reveals isn't just the fall of a beloved MVP. It's the story of a man who lived through a decade of physical pain, emotional turmoil, and public judgment, yet continued to stand, continued to fight, and continued to try to write his own ending. To understand Derrick Rose's rise and fall, you must understand the emotional framework that shaped him long before the MVP trophies, the injuries, or the headlines. Rose was not built like most stars. He was soft-spoken, introverted, and deeply loyal, traits that endeared him to fans but made the pressures of superstardom extraordinarily heavy. Growing up in Chicago's South Side, survival meant staying quiet, staying humble, and trusting only those closest to you. That mindset carried him into the NBA, where vulnerability is often seen as weakness. When Rose reached MVP status, he carried not just the weight of a franchise, but the weight of an entire city that saw him as its symbol of hope. Every accolade raised expectations. Every mistake amplified doubts. And when he suffered his first major injury, the psychological toll of letting people down began to eat at him. Rose feared disappointing the community that had lifted him. He feared returning too early. He feared losing the identity that basketball had given him. Then came the civil trial, a public exposure of his private life that contrasted sharply with his naturally guarded personality. Rose, who rarely shared anything personal, suddenly saw intimate details dissected on national platforms. For a man who relied on emotional privacy, the experience was shattering. His usual coping mechanism, silence, was interpreted as guilt, indifference, or avoidance. The world wanted explanations. Rose wanted escape. At his core, Derrick Rose was battling forces he never learned to articulate: fear, pressure, guilt, and the haunting belief that he could never return to who he once was. His story is not one of weakness, but of a deeply human struggle against expectations too heavy for one person to carry alone. The climax of Derrick Rose's fall came not on the court, but under the cold, unforgiving glare of a federal courtroom. For years, Rose's public persona had been built on humility, kindness, and a quiet dedication to his craft. But during the 2016 civil trial, all of that collided with a wave of headlines, scrutiny, and speculation that reshaped the way the world saw him. The moment Rose took the stand, the narrative surrounding him shifted dramatically. Every statement he made was dissected online. Every reaction, every pause, every expression became fuel for debate. Media outlets amplified the most sensational details, often stripping away context and replacing it with shock value. Social media, relentless and unfiltered, turned the case into a battleground of opinions. Even though the case was civil, not criminal, and even though Rose maintained his innocence, the emotional and reputational damage had already begun. But the true breaking point came when Rose admitted confusion about certain legal terms during questioning. What he intended as honesty was interpreted by some as carelessness or irresponsibility. The headlines seized on it instantly. For a player who had spent his entire career defined by quiet dignity, this loss of control over his own narrative was devastating. When the jury ultimately ruled in his favor, the legal battle ended, but the public battle had only grown louder. For many viewers, the verdict resolved the case. For others, the headlines left a permanent impression. In that moment, Derrick Rose realized that even innocence could not fully restore a shattered image. The world no longer viewed him as just a fallen MVP. They now saw him through the lens of a controversy he could never fully escape. The consequences of Derrick Rose's tumultuous years rippled far beyond the courtroom and the injury report. His reputation, once untouchable, once beloved across an entire league, became permanently divided. To some, he remained the humble hometown hero whose body betrayed him. To others, the trial and headlines cast an unshakable shadow over his legacy. No verdict could erase the emotional aftershocks of the public scrutiny he endured. Professionally, Rose's career transformed from centerpiece to journeyman. After the trial and his mounting injuries, he was traded, released, and signed to minimum deals. Moves unthinkable during his MVP era. Teams no longer viewed him as the franchise anchor, but as a risk, a temporary addition rather than a foundation. His minutes decreased, his role diminished, and the pressure to prove he still belonged grew heavier each time he stepped onto the court. Emotionally, the toll was profound. The silence Rose relied on throughout his life became a double-edged sword. It protected him, but it also isolated him. He avoided discussing the trial, the criticism, or the pain of losing the athletic gifts that once defined his identity. The public interpreted his reticence as indifference, when in reality it was self-preservation. Rose had always expressed himself through movement. Now his body, once his strongest voice, could no longer speak for him. Off the court, sponsorships faded. Media narratives hardened. The public's relationship with him fractured into conflicting versions: admiration, disappointment, empathy, suspicion. Every new signing or performance reignited debates about who he truly was. Derrick Rose was not erased from basketball, but the version of him the world once adored could never fully return. His legacy became a story of brilliance interrupted, innocence debated, and a man forever changed by forces both within and far beyond his control. Derrick Rose's comeback was not the triumphant, linear rise that Hollywood loves to script. It was something quieter, something rawer, something deeply human. After the injuries, the trial, and the judgment from millions, Rose found himself stripped of everything that once defined him: explosiveness, fame, certainty, and the unwavering belief of a city that once treated him as a savior. What remained was a man forced to rebuild not just his career, but his sense of self. His journey back began in the most unceremonious way. A veteran's minimum contract, bouncing between teams that saw him as a low-risk flyer rather than a future star. The Knicks, the Cavaliers, the Timberwolves. Each stop felt like another reminder of how far he had fallen. Gone were the MVP chants, the roaring crowds, the billboards. In their place were questions, doubts, and a spotlight that now focused more on what he couldn't do than what he still could. But something changed inside Rose during those years. Freed from the suffocating expectations of being Chicago's chosen one, he found space to breathe again. Teammates spoke about his professionalism. Coaches praised his maturity. Rose, once guarded and haunted, began expressing gratitude simply for the chance to play the game he loved. His humility became his strength. Then came October 31st, 2018, a night that rewrote the narrative. Wearing a Timberwolves jersey, Rose delivered a 50-point masterpiece, a performance overflowing with emotion, determination, and defiance. The final buzzer sounded and Rose collapsed into tears. This wasn't a return to MVP form. It was a resurrection of spirit. Fans across the league, even those who had once criticized him, found themselves cheering, crying, celebrating a moment that transcended basketball. It wasn't about numbers, it was about human resilience. Though Rose would never again be the explosive force he once was, he carved out a new identity. Veteran leader, skilled scorer, mentor, survivor. His later years with Minnesota, Detroit, and New York proved he still possessed remarkable skill. But more importantly, they showed he had the emotional durability to carry the weight of everything he had endured. Derrick Rose did not return to who he once was. He evolved into someone stronger, wiser, and far more complex. His comeback wasn't just about basketball. It was about reclaiming dignity, rewriting a legacy, and proving that even after the world stops believing in you, you can still find a way to believe in yourself. Derrick Rose's story is a reminder that greatness is never guaranteed, and neither is the love that comes with it. He showed us how quickly a hero can rise, how brutally life can intervene, and how fiercely a person must fight just to stand again. His journey forces us to confront the truth that athletes are not invincible icons, but human beings shaped by pressure, pain, and the expectations of millions. Yet Rose also revealed something deeper. Resilience does not always look like dominance. Sometimes it looks like humility, like finding meaning after losing everything you thought defined you. His comeback was not about redemption in the eyes of the world, but redemption in the quiet spaces of his own heart. His story teaches us that even when the spotlight fades and the world turns its back, there is dignity in continuing, courage in rebuilding, and beauty in refusing to surrender to the darkest chapters of your life. Thank you for exploring Derrick Rose's powerful journey. Comment below which NBA legend, fallen star, or untold story you want us to reveal next on Off Court Truths.